You know how some nights change everything? How you can look back and pinpoint the exact moment your life shifted off its axis. That rainy Tuesday in October was mine. I stood outside Jake's apartment door, my hair plastered to my skull, mascara probably streaking down my cheeks like some tragic movie heroine. But this wasn't a movie, this was my life falling apart in real time. My duffel bag felt heavier with each passing second, weighted down not just with clothes but with the fight I'd just had with Meredith. "You're pathetic, Emily," she'd screamed, her voice echoing off our dorm walls. "Always running to your brother's friends when things get tough. Grow up." Maybe she was right. Maybe I was pathetic. But standing there in the hallway, listening to the rain pound against the windows, I knew I couldn't go back to that suffocating room. Not tonight. So I knocked. When Jake opened the door, I saw something flicker across his face: surprise, concern, and something else I couldn't quite name. He'd always been Liam's reliable friend, the one who'd drive us home from parties, who'd help with homework without making me feel stupid. But that night, in his worn MIT t-shirt and basketball shorts, he looked different, older, more present. "Fight with my roommate," I mumbled, suddenly embarrassed by my dramatic entrance. "Can I crash here for a few days?" He stepped aside without hesitation, and I felt something warm unfurl in my chest. Safety, maybe, or something more dangerous that I wasn't ready to name yet. As I curled up on his couch that first night, borrowing his old college hoodie that smelled like cedar and something uniquely him, I caught him watching me. Not in a creepy way, more like he was seeing me for the first time. And maybe he was. Maybe I was finally letting myself be seen. The truth is, I'd been running from more than just my roommate. I'd been running from the way my heart stuttered whenever Jake smiled at me, from the way I found excuses to visit Liam just to catch glimpses of his best friend. I'd been running from feelings that felt too big, too complicated, too risky for someone like me. But that night, wrapped in his warmth and his kindness, I stopped running. Those few days stretched like honey in sunlight. 2 weeks of pretending this was temporary while secretly hoping it would never end. I folded myself into Jake's life like I belonged there, and maybe I did. His apartment became my sanctuary. I'd wake up to the sound of him making coffee, that rich aroma mixing with the morning light streaming through his kitchen window. He'd leave a cup for me on the counter, always prepared exactly how I liked it, to sugars, splash of cream. He'd remembered from all those family barbecues, all those casual moments I thought he'd forgotten. "You don't have to do this," I'd tell him, but he'd just shrug and smile. "I want to," he'd say, and something in his voice made my pulse quicken. We developed routines without planning them. Bad horror movies became our Thursday night tradition. I'd curl up on one end of the couch, my feet in his lap, while he'd absently massage my ankles during the scary parts. His hands were warm and careful, like he was handling something precious. During commercial breaks, we'd talk, really talk, about my art school rejections, all 5 of them. About his fear of staying in this town forever, of never being brave enough to chase his dreams. About the weight of expectations and the terror of disappointing people we loved. "You're not disappointing anyone," I told him one night, my voice fierce in the dark. "You're just finding your way." He looked at me then, really looked, and I felt exposed under his gaze. Vulnerable, wanted. "What about you?" he asked softly. "What are you finding?" I didn't have an answer then, but I was starting to suspect it might be him. The intimacy crept up on us slowly. Shared meals became shared secrets. Casual touches lingered longer. When I'd fall asleep during our movie nights, I'd wake up covered with his softest blanket, his jacket draped over my shoulders. Sometimes I'd catch him watching me with this expression, tender and conflicted and hungry all at once. I started stealing his sweaters, telling myself it was just because they were warm. But really, I loved being surrounded by his scent, by the feeling of being wrapped in something that belonged to him. He never complained, just did extra laundry and bought more coffee when I drank his entire stash. "You're spoiling me," I'd tease, but he'd just smile, that soft smile that made my knees weak. "Maybe I want to," he'd reply, and the air would thicken with possibilities neither of us was brave enough to voice. The tension was building like a summer storm, slow, inevitable, electric. I'd catch him staring at my legs when I wore his t-shirts to bed. He'd blush and look away, but not before I saw the want in his eyes. And God, did I want him to keep looking. I began pushing boundaries without quite meaning to. Wearing less, to bed, leaving the bathroom door cracked when I showered, curling up closer during our movie nights until I could feel his heartbeat against my cheek. He'd whisper, his voice strained, and I'd pretend to be asleep while my pulse hammered against my throat. We were dancing around something dangerous, something that could change everything. But I was tired of being careful, tired of pretending I didn't want what I wanted, tired of running from the way he made me feel desired, protected, alive. The night everything changed, I made a choice. I borrowed his sleep shirt, the faded black one that barely covered my thighs. I knew what I was doing when I padded to his bedroom doorway, when I leaned against the frame and let him see me. "You're staring," I said, my voice deliberately teasing. His eyes went dark, traveling down my body with an intensity that made my skin burn. I'm not apologizing for it. The honesty in his voice, the raw wanted undid me completely. This was Jake, my brother's best friend, the boy who'd driven me to prom when my date got food poisoning. But he was also the man who'd held me when I cried about my rejections, who'd made me feel safe when I had nowhere else to go. "Good," I whispered, and watched something snap in his expression. "Because I don't want you to stop." The storm hit just after midnight. Thunder rolled across the sky like God was rearranging furniture, and the power flickered once, twice, then died completely. I should have gone back to the couch, should have maintained the careful distance we'd been pretending was enough. Instead, I found myself standing in his bedroom doorway again, my heart thundering louder than the storm outside. "The power's out," I said, as if he couldn't see the darkness for himself. I noticed. His voice was careful, controlled, but I could hear the tension underneath, the same electric current that had been building between us for weeks. "I'm scared," I lied. Well, half lied. I wasn't scared of the storm, but I was terrified of what I was about to do. Terrified of wanting him this much, of risking everything for one night in his arms. He said my name like a prayer, like a warning. "Just to sleep," I whispered, though we both knew I was lying. "Just until the power comes back." He pulled back his covers without another word, and I slipped into his bed like I belonged there. Like I'd been waiting my whole life for this moment. The sheets smelled like him, clean and warm and masculine. I pressed my back against his chest, feeling his breath hitch when my body molded against his. "You're shaking," he murmured, his lips brushing my ear. "I'm not scared of the storm," I admitted, my voice barely audible over the rain. His arm tightened around me, and I could feel his heart hammering against my back. "What are you scared of?" I turned in his arms then, meeting his eyes in the darkness. Lightning flashed, illuminating his face for a split second, the sharp line of his jaw, the way he was looking at me like I was something precious and dangerous all at once. "You," I whispered. "This, how much I want you." Something broken. His expression then, the careful control, the protective distance, it all crumbled. We can't," I pressed closer, my hands fisting in his shirt. "Because of Liam? Because I'm supposed to be his little sister forever? Because you think I don't know what I want? Because you're everything," he said, his voice raw and broken. "Because if we do this, I won't be able to let you go." My heart stopped, started again. "Who says I want you to let me go?" When I kissed him, it was like lightning striking twice, soft at first, questioning, giving him a chance to pull away. But he didn't. Instead, he kissed me back with years of pent-up longing, his hands tangling in my hair, my name a groan against my lips. "Are you sure?" he whispered against my mouth, and I loved him for asking, loved him for caring enough to check, even when we were both drowning in want. "I've never been more sure of anything," I breathed and climbed into his lap, my thighs bracketing his hips. What happened next was pure fire. His hands on my skin, my fingers learning the planes of his chest, the way he said my name like it was the only word that mattered. We moved together like we'd been made for this, like every stolen glance and careful touch had been leading to this moment. He was gentle and passionate and reverent, treating my body like something sacred. When he traced the curve of my hip with his thumb, when he whispered how beautiful I was, how long he'd wanted me, I felt like I was coming home to myself. "I've wanted this for so long," I confessed against his throat, and felt him shudder beneath me. "So have I," he admitted, his voice thick with emotion. "God, so have I." We didn't sleep that night. We talked and touched and discovered each other like explorers mapping new territory. He told me about the first time he'd really seen me not as Liam's sister, but as a woman, I told him about all the nights I'd gone to bed thinking about him, about how I'd started choosing my outfits based on whether I'd see him. "You're trouble," he murmured, pressing kisses along my collarbone. "The best kind," I replied, and felt him smile against my skin. When dawn crept through his windows, we were tangled together like vines, my head on his chest, his fingers tracing lazy patterns on my back. I felt claimed, marked, transformed. The girl who'd knocked on his door in the rain was gone, replaced by someone braver, someone willing to fight for what she wanted. And what I wanted was him. Morning brought clarity and complications in equal measure. I woke up wrapped around Jake like a vine, sunlight streaming across his chest, highlighting the marks I'd left on his skin. Evidence of our night together painted across his body in shades of red and purple. I traced them with my finger, marveling at how they looked like abstract art. "Guess we can't blame the storm for this," I said, trying to keep my voice light. Despite the gravity settling in my chest, Jake was quiet for a long moment, and I felt the shift in his energy like a physical thing. The easy intimacy of the night before was crystallizing into something harder, more complex in the harsh light of day. He started, and I knew from his tone that whatever came next would hurt. "Don't," I said, pressing my face against his chest. "Please don't ruin this." But he was already pulling away, emotionally if not physically. I could feel him retreating, building walls between us even as I lay in his arms. "This is complicated," he said finally, his voice carefully neutral. "Only if we make it complicated." I sat up, letting the sheet fall away, watching his eyes flicker to my bare skin before he forced himself to look away. "It doesn't have to be. Your brother doesn't own me," I finished fiercely. "I'm not his property, Jake. I'm a grown woman who can make her own choices." "I know that. Of course I know that." He sat up too, running his hands through his hair. "But he's my best friend. He trusts me." "To what? Keep me locked in some tower forever?" The hurt was bleeding through my voice now, raw and angry. "I'm not asking you to betray Liam. I'm asking you to be honest about what you want. What I want doesn't matter if it hurts people I care about. What about hurting me?" The words came out smaller than I intended, vulnerability cracking through my anger. "Does that matter?" Something broke in his expression then. For a moment, I saw past his careful control to the want underneath, the longing he was fighting so hard to suppress. But then he shuddered it away, and I knew I'd lost him. "You're young," he said quietly. "You'll move on. Find someone, don't you dare." I was out of bed now, grabbing his shirt from the floor and pulling it on. "Don't you dare patronize me like that. Don't tell me what I'll do or how I'll feel. You don't get to decide that my feelings aren't real just because they're inconvenient. For you." He flinched like I'd slapped him, but he didn't take it back, didn't fight for us, just sat there looking beautiful and broken and infuriatingly noble. "I should go," I said, my voice hollow. "I should have left last week anyway. Please no." I held up my hand, tears burning my eyes. "You've made your choice. I'm not going to beg you to choose me. But God, I wanted to." I wanted to crawl back into his bed and convince him that we were worth the risk, that what we had was rare and precious and worth fighting for. Instead, I gathered my dignity around me like armor and walked out of his room. The rest of the week passed in a blur of careful politeness. We moved around each other like ghosts, speaking only when necessary, both of us pretending that everything was fine. But I could feel him watching me sometimes, could see the regret in his eyes when he thought I wasn't looking. It wasn't fine. It was the furthest thing from fine. But I had my pride, and I wasn't going to be the one to break first. Packing my duffel bag felt like closing a book I'd never get to finish. Each item I folded away was a memory, a moment of happiness I'd have to carry with me instead of living in. His hoodies that I'd claimed as my own, the coffee mug he'd designated as mine, the photo of us from Liam's birthday party where his arm was around my shoulders and I looked genuinely happy. Jake hovered in the doorway, watching me pack with an expression I couldn't read. The careful distance he'd maintained all week was still there, but it was cracking around the edges. I could see the war playing out across his face, duty versus desire, loyalty versus love. "You don't have to leave," he said finally, his voice rough. "Yes, I do." I didn't look up from my packing. "We both know I can't stay. Not like this. It's okay," I lied, zipping up my bag with more force than necessary. "I found a place. Sarah's roommate moved out, so I'm taking over her lease." It wasn't okay. Nothing about this was okay. But I'd learned something important during my time here. I was stronger than I'd given myself credit for. Strong enough to walk away from something that was slowly killing me. Strong enough to demand more than scraps of affection and careful distance. I hefted my bag onto my shoulder and turned to face him. He looked terrible, hollow-eyed and exhausted, like he'd been fighting a war he couldn't win. Good. He should look terrible. He should feel terrible. Thank you, I said formally, like he was a stranger who'd done me a small favor, for letting me stay. I appreciate it. Don't, he said, his voice breaking. Don't thank me. Not for this. I wanted to comfort him. Even hurt and angry and disappointed, my instinct was to soothe his pain. But I was learning to put myself first, to recognize when caring for someone else was costing me pieces of myself. I have to go, I said instead. Sarah's expecting me. I made it to the door before my courage failed me, turned back to see him standing in the middle of his living room, looking lost and beautiful and utterly miserable. You know, I said, my voice steady despite the tears threatening to fall. Sometimes the thing you're most afraid of, that's the thing worth fighting for. I wasn't just talking about us, though that was part of it. I was talking about me, about my fear of wanting too much, of being too much, of taking up space in the world. I was talking about the way I'd spent my whole life making myself smaller to fit into other people's expectations. His eyes widened, and I saw understanding dawn in them. But it was too late. I'd found my voice, and I wasn't going to waste it. Begging someone to love me. Goodbye, Jake, I said, and walked out of his apartment with my head held high. The drive to Sarah's was a blur of tears and determination. I'd rented a U-Haul for my meager possessions, and every mile felt like a small victory. I was choosing myself. I was choosing to believe that I deserved more than careful distance and noble sacrifice. Sarah met me at the door with wine and tissues, taking one look at my face and pulling me into a fierce hug. He's an idiot, she said without preamble. How do you, please? I've seen the way you look at him. And more importantly, I've seen the way he looks at you when he thinks no one's watching. She helped me carry my bags inside. He's scared. Of what? Of wanting something he thinks he can't have. Of disrupting the careful balance he's built in his life. Of taking a risk. She poured me a generous glass of wine. But mostly he's scared of how much he loves you. I wanted to believe her. God, how I wanted to believe her. But hope was a dangerous thing, and I'd already been burned once. It doesn't matter, I said, sinking onto her couch. He made his choice. Choices can be unmade, she said gently. But you can't make them for him. So I didn't. I threw myself into building a new life instead. I got a job at a local gallery, started painting again, made new friends. I went on dates with nice guys who weren't Jake, who didn't make my heart race or my palms sweat. I was learning to be okay on my own, to find joy in small moments, to believe that I was enough just as I was. But I missed him. God, how I missed him. Missed his laugh, his terrible jokes, the way he'd look at me like I was the most interesting person in the room. I missed feeling safe and wanted and understood. And then, 3 days after I'd settled into my new life, he showed up at my door. I almost didn't answer the knock. I was in my pajamas, hair in a messy bun, face mask smeared across my cheeks, but something about the rhythm of it, urgent but careful, made me look through the peephole. Jake stood in my hallway, holding 2 cups of coffee and looking like he'd been hit by a truck. His hair was disheveled, his eyes wild, and there was a desperate energy radiating from him that made my heart stutter. I opened the door, but didn't invite him in. Jake, what are you doing here? I brought coffee, he said, holding up the cups like a peace offering. 2 sugars, splash of cream. He'd remembered. Of course he'd remembered. That was the problem. With Jake, he noticed everything, cared about everything, remembered every small detail that mattered to me. It would have been easier to get over him if he were actually selfish or cruel instead of just scared. I'm not dressed for visitors, I said, gesturing to my pajamas. You're beautiful, he said automatically, then blushed like he hadn't meant to say it out loud. I mean, you always look beautiful, but also, I don't care what you're wearing. I just need to talk to you. I wanted to slam the door in his face. Wanted to protect myself from whatever he was about to say, from the hope that was already blooming in my chest despite my better judgment. But I also wanted to hear him out, to understand what had changed in the 3 days since I'd walked out of his apartment. Talk, I said, not moving from the doorway. He took a shaky breath, running his free hand through his hair. I'm an idiot. Yes, I agreed. You are. I've been miserable, he continued, like I hadn't spoken. Absolutely miserable. I can't sleep, can't eat, can't focus on anything because all I can think about is you. About how stupid I was to let you walk away. You didn't let me walk away, I said, my voice sharper than I intended. You pushed me away. There's a difference. You're right. I did. He looked down at his feet, then back up at me. I was scared, terrified actually, of wanting you as much as I do, of what it would mean if we tried and it didn't work out, of losing you and Liam and everything I've built my life around. And now I'm more scared of living without you than I am of taking the risk. He stepped closer, and I caught his scent, cedar and coffee, and something uniquely him. I realized something after you left. I've been so focused on protecting everyone else that I forgot to protect the most important thing, which is us. This, he gestured between us, his eyes intense. What we have is rare, Em. It's precious and complicated and scary as hell, but it's also beautiful. And I almost threw it away because I was too much of a coward to fight for it. My heart was hammering so hard I was sure he could hear it. What about Liam? I talked to him. Jake's smile was rueful. Called him yesterday and told him everything. About you staying with me. About how I feel about you. About what happened between us. My stomach dropped. Jake, no, you didn't have to. Yes, I did. Because I was tired of hiding. Tired of pretending that loving you was something to be ashamed of. He reached out like he wanted to touch me, then let his hand fall. Do you want to know what he said? I was almost afraid to ask. What? He said. About damn time. Jake's smile was real now, warm and bright. Apparently I'm not as subtle as I thought I was. He's known I was crazy about you for years. Said he was just waiting for me to get my head out of my ass and do something about it. He said that, word for word. Then he threatened to beat me up if I hurt you. But I think that's just brotherly duty. Jake stepped closer again, and this time I didn't back away. I'm all in him. I know I don't deserve another chance after the way I handled things, but I'm asking for one anyway. I'm asking you to take a risk with me. I stared at him, this beautiful, complicated man who'd turned my world upside down and then helped me put it back together. He was offering me everything I'd wanted: his love, his commitment, his willingness to fight for us. But I'd learned something important in the past 3 days. I don't need you to complete me, I said quietly. I was fine before you, and I'll be fine after if this doesn't work out. But I want you in my life. I want to build something with you, not because I'm running from something else, but because I'm running towards something better. Is that a yes? That's a yes, I said, and finally stepped aside to let him in. He set the coffee down on my kitchen counter and pulled me into his arms, holding me so tightly I could barely breathe. I love you, he whispered against my hair. I should have said it before, but I love you. Not as Liam's sister, not as some conquest, but as the woman who makes me want to be braver than I am. I love you too, I said, the words feeling like coming home. I love your terrible jokes and your careful hands and the way you make me feel safe enough to be myself. When he kissed me, it was different from that first night. Less desperate, more certain. Like we were sealing a promise instead of giving into temptation. Like we were choosing each other with full knowledge of the risks and deciding we were worth it anyway. So what happens now? I asked when we finally broke apart. Now we figure it out together, he said, resting his forehead against mine. We take it one day at a time and see where it goes. I like the sound of that. Good, he said, grinning. Because I'm not going anywhere. You're stuck with me, Emily Foster. Promise? Promise? I'm sitting in our kitchen, not his kitchen, not my kitchen, but ours, watching Jake make coffee. In the morning sunlight, he's humming something under his breath, and there's a piece of his hair sticking up in the back that I'll smooth down in a moment. It's been 6 months since I showed up at his door in the rain. 6 months since everything changed. We've had our fights, our moments of doubt, our growing pains. Learning to be together instead of just wanting to be together has been messier and more wonderful than either of us expected. Liam gives us shit constantly, but in the way that means he's happy for us. Sarah claims credit for our entire relationship, which is only partially accurate, but we let her have it. My art is getting better, more honest. Like loving Jake has taught me to be braver in all areas of my life. You're staring, Jake says without turning around, and I can hear the smile in his voice. I'm not apologizing for it, I reply, echoing his words from that first night. He turns then, coffee mug in hand, and gives me that look, the one that says I'm precious and wanted and home. Good, he says, crossing to where I'm sitting and settling the mug in front of me. Because I don't want you to stop. Perfect, I think, taking a sip of perfectly prepared coffee. This is what perfect looks like, not the absence of struggle, but the presence of someone worth struggling with. What are you thinking about? Jake asks, settling into the chair across from me. Just this, I say, gesturing to the space between us. Us. How good this is. Yeah, he agrees, reaching across the table to take my hand. It really is. And it is. It's messy and complicated and sometimes scary, but it's also beautiful. We're beautiful. And for the first time in my life, I'm not running from that. I'm running toward it, toward him, toward the life we're building together, one morning at a time. My friend's brother needed someone to believe in him. His best friend's sister needed someone to see her as more than just a supporting character in her own life. Somehow, we ended up being exactly what the other needed. Sometimes the best love stories aren't about finding your other half. Sometimes they're about finding someone who makes you want to be whole all on your own, then choosing to share that wholeness with them. This is my story. This is our story. And I can't wait to see how it ends.